So welcome. I'm Samantha Johnston. I'm the Executive Director and Curator here at the Colorado Photographic Arts Center. And we're so excited you're all joining us this evening for our virtual town hall for a Yellow Rose project. And we're excited to have Meg and Francis here in Colorado, and the gallery is behind us. We will have a little video of the whole show for everyone to see. I just wanted to, again, thank everyone for joining us this evening. A big thank you to my staff and my board and our interns for helping to always make everything work and for events like this to come together. A huge thank you to our sponsors for the exhibition, which were Hana Mule Paper and Reed Art and Imaging, who helped to donate the paper and have the printing happen. As well as I'd like to thank the Bonfi Stanton Foundation, SCFD, and Colorado Creative Industries for their support. We have a great program this evening with a few of the artists speaking, and Jillian Allison joining us from the Center for Colorado's Women's History. And so just a few housekeeping. If you haven't muted yourself, please do so. And if you do have questions, please feel free to put questions in the chat as the evening's going on, and we will have time to kind of go through those later after we get through the initial talks. And as I said, I'm excited to have Meg and Francis here to see all of this come together. We started planning this about a year ago when Meg was here. I heard inklings of the project. She was here for our show Coming Together that she was in. And then Francis and I spoke in last year in Filter. And I felt that having this exhibit in person was going to be really important, and especially in an election year. And so when no images existed, I said, we're having this show. And so here we are. We are having it, and there is work on the walls and all the images on the TV in the back. And while many things have changed this year with the pandemic and everything else, we're excited to have the work on the wall and to have the conversation. That's something we really love to do here at CPAC, and I love to do with curating, is to put work in conversation and put artists in conversation with each other. And we're really excited for some programming we have rolling out. We're going to be doing some fireside chats on Instagram the next 3 Tuesdays, so please join us there. And you know, as everybody knows, voting is important this year, as it is in any year. And then with the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, it just feels, this show feels like a really great time to be having this conversation, to provide space for people to discover that their voice matters. So thank you everyone for being here. And I'm gonna start it off. Jillian Allison is joining us, and we're really excited to have her talk about the 19th Amendment a little bit before the artist speaks. Thank you, Jillian.
Great, thank you so much. Go ahead and share my screen. I have a little bit of a slideshow. Let's see. All right, here we go. So I am the director of the Center for Colorado Women's History, which is a museum of history, Colorado, the State Historical Society. We currently have an exhibition called Bold Women Change History, which is about Colorado's role in the passage of the 19th Amendment. And at the History Colorado Center, which is just a couple of blocks away downtown, they have an exhibit called American Democracy from the Smithsonian, which also has a section on women's suffrage. And that exhibit is free, or the entire museum, the History Colorado Center, is free on weekends up until the election. So it's a great time to check it out. And there is a lot of great information there that you can find. History Colorado was one of the lead organizations on Colorado's efforts to commemorate, explore, and learn more about the Women's Vote Centennial. We led a statewide effort with organizations throughout all the counties of Colorado to really explore what this means on a national level and on a local level. And so I had the opportunity to travel around the state throughout the last year and talk to people about how it impacted their communities and how they wanted to share it with their communities. So tonight I wanted to share a little bit about what I have learned. This topic is so huge, so there's no way that I could cover even the beginnings of all of it in such a short time. So at the end, I will share in the chat a link to some resources that we put together at History Colorado that go into all different topics. And I also wanted to talk about what is the 19th Amendment, what does it do, and what are its limitations. So as we look here, this is the actual text of the 19th Amendment, which basically just lifts one barrier for voting. It removes sex discrimination at the polls. And there are other barriers that were allowed to remain afterwards. And so the 19th Amendment's passage in 1920 is not a magic number where everyone has the right to vote after that. It also does not give women the right to vote. It's not written in the affirmative. And so there were women who could vote before this, and there were many men and women who could not vote afterwards. This is a nationalization ceremony that took place at the History Colorado Center earlier this year. So some of the examples of the barriers that were in place after the 19th Amendment would be Jim Crow laws, literacy tests, and polling taxes that were put into place to prevent African Americans from voting. Some of these things, like the polling taxes in some places, were cumulative. So if there was one election that you felt very passionate about and wanting to vote in, you would need to pay that year's poll tax and the years before when you did not vote. So these were really powerfully restrictive measures. There were also a number of barriers to citizenship that were based on ancestry that weren't lifted until 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, like the Chinese Exclusion Act and laws that prevented Native Americans from becoming citizens. And so up until even 1962, states in the West prohibited Native Americans from voting. And we know today that there are still battles going on for access to the polls, whether it is based on physical address, as we see in the Dakotas for Native Americans, people who have felonies. There are all sorts of barriers that continue on. So this access to the polls is not a static thing, and it is largely regulated by states. So this is a famous image from 1916 that shows how before the 19th Amendment, the access to voting was really pursued on a state-by-state basis. So a lot of what we are taught about the women's suffrage movement and sort of the famous players that we hear in the famous places like Seneca Falls are largely centered around northeastern United States. But states like Colorado and the states in the West are actually the first states to enfranchise women because that could be determined on a state-by-state basis. And you can see in this image some of the dates in which that took place. So Wyoming was as early as 1869. Colorado was the first state to use a referendum to allow the voters to decide. So it'd be the all-male voters of Colorado. And another thing that was happening is that it was happening in an incremental way as well. It wasn't just that you could vote or you could not vote. Certain states would allow women to participate in certain aspects of elections. And so at first in Colorado, for instance, when our state became part of the Union, women could vote, and they could vote only in school board elections. There were some states that would allow women to vote only in municipal elections. You can see Illinois, you could only vote for president. So there's lots of variations on how this took place. And so even though the passage of the 19th Amendment is this big national story this year, it's really also a story about local efforts. The voting mechanisms were also different at this time. So this is a ballot from Colorado in 1893. And this is the ballot where the all-male voters decided to allow women to vote. So you can see at the bottom, there's the equal suffrage approved or not approved. But there are 3 parties on this ticket, which is from Pinton County. The Republicans are not on here at all. And the ballot is designed so that you can pick your party and just vote straight down. You don't need to consider for each office which party you're going to select someone from. They're designed just to go right down the line. And one of the things that did was make the voting a little bit less private, is that people could see. There were also some times when you would just pick your party's ballot. It would already be selected and filled out. There were some places where they would be color-coded, so it was kind of clear to people who you might be voting for, a lot less private than it is today. And the places where people were voting were different. So these are 2 polling places in Denver in 1894. So you see that women are voting here. And polling did take place at places like saloons. And so especially with a little less privacy, they were rowdy. So with some of those arguments that the polling places were not ideal places for women, it really was in a literal sense, that there would be drunk people, fistfights breaking out, and things like that at some of these polling stations. And when we think about the suffrage movement, it's also often like focused on a few sort of hero stories, but really it's a story of thousands of people across the nation working together. And so this is Frances Willard, who was one of the most famous women at one point in the United States. And she was the founder of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And women's clubs were instrumental in the passage of the 19th Amendment. And they were not like book clubs or something like that. They were these highly organized confederated clubs that would have branches throughout the country. So the WCTU had a national mission, it had local branches, it had state branches who could connect and work together on issues like temperance and suffrage, but also tackle local issues. And there were many, many organizations, not just the Temperance Union, that were working on all sorts of causes, like establishing parks, they established most of the libraries in the United States were built by women's clubs. There were all sorts of things that they were working on at the same time. But because of these networks, they could really activate and work together on these causes. This is a local woman from Colorado who was instrumental and a women's club activist, and she's Sarah Platt Decker. And she became someone who was active because she was widowed 3 times. And each time, her property that was owned by her husband all went back to his family. And so she was left with nothing and started over. So the laws and things that were in place at that time were really not protecting women. And so this is just another example of the many things that women were working for at the same time. It was just like any point in time, not a single issue or a single concern that women had. Allowing the vote would let them work on these in many different ways and give them different agency and capacity to tackle these issues. So these are our local Colorado women who were all a part of the nonpartisan Colorado Equal Suffrage Association. Just as examples of women leaders who were here in Colorado, but in each state there were thousands of women who were working on these efforts, and men. And these women were all writers. They wrote for local papers. They also wrote for national papers. Elizabeth Ensley, for example, wrote for National Black Women's Club newspapers so that she could tell people what it was like to be a voter, and share the successes of Colorado and how those advocacy efforts that they put together were successful, what worked, share what she had learned. And Alice Meredith, who's pictured on the bicycle, did the same thing. She would use Colorado as an example to show how this could be successful in other states and across the nation. So once women had the vote, by the very next election, 1894, women were elected to the state legislature. So these are the first 3 women that were ever elected to a state legislature in 1894, all from Colorado. Carrie Clyde Hawley, the woman on the left, is the first woman ever to propose a bill that became a law, and she raised the age of consent from 16 to 18. And so women focused on laws that would protect women and family largely. There were in the first few decades that they were serving in office. So juvenile justice, shorter work days for women, protections for women and children, and these laws that they passed were again held up as examples for the rest of the country as what could happen if women were able to serve and vote and participate fully in their country. So here we have the governor of Colorado signing the 19th Amendment. By the time this happened, in Colorado, women had been voting for 27 years, and the newspaper basically said, we've said all we need to say about suffrage at this point. And so there was very little excitement in Colorado about this, at least from the newspaper's perspective. I have to think all of these women in this picture are enthusiastic. But in this final stage where the states are ratifying the 19th Amendment one by one, is where the yellow rose comes into play. In Tennessee, which is the last state to ratify, the suffragists were waiting outside the state house as the legislators who would make the decision were coming in, and they had yellow roses to show support. And so if the man was going to vote for it, he would wear a yellow rose, and then there were anti-suffragists on the other side who had red roses, and they would give red roses to the people who were going to vote no. And it famously came down to one vote, and I believe that man had decided to vote against the amendment, but then had a letter in his pocket from his mother who said he should be a good boy and vote for women's suffrage. So in the end, it really came down to her. But once it did pass, there were immediately more actions that continued on. These are women who are in the National Women's Party, which is Alice Paul's organization, and Alice Paul wrote the ERA, which was originally written in 1923, so just a few years after the passage of the 19th Amendment. And this is where the suffrage colors that we often see come from. They're really from the Women's Party, and so the flags that they are holding at this pageant, which was held at the Garden of the Gods in Colorado Springs, show the purple, white, and gold. And the purple is said to represent loyalty and constance of purpose. The white is an emblem of purity of purpose, and the gold is the color of light and life. And the Women's Party and Alice Paul were really more of the more radical militant arm of the suffragists, who are known for protesting outside the White House. They were the first people to protest outside the White House, which is very controversial at the time for a number of reasons, but particularly because it was during World War I. And they were imprisoned. Some of them were imprisoned, force-fed. it was really, a fierce battle, and they used a variety of techniques that we now see as, um, sort of our standard methods of protest were things that Alice Paul brought to the United States from um, English suffragettes and introduced in Washington, D.C. And here we have our voters today. And I think we, especially right now, really have an understanding of how our voting laws are not static, and that each state has so much influence on the voting practices. In Colorado, where we have the vote at home option, we consistently have some of the highest voter turnout in the nation, even in primaries and non-presidential elections. So I will leave you with that, and I'll share that resources list in the chat.
Thank you so much, Jillian. All right, and so next I'm going to just show a short video of the show and Megan Francis speaking. And again, Jillian, thank you so much for sharing. That was fantastic.
The Yellow Rose Project is a large-scale photographic collaboration made by 105 women across the country. The artists were invited to make work in response, reflection, or reaction to the ratification of the 19th Amendment. The goal of this project was to provide a focal point and platform for image makers to share contemporary viewpoints as we approach the centennial, which was marked in August 2020. Our mission in researching the complication of this anniversary was to gain a deeper understanding of American history and culture, from this moment in time to build a bridge from the past to the present and onto the future.
Though this movement granted rights to some women, and this achievement in itself is to be acknowledged and celebrated, the struggle did not end there. It was not until much later that all American women, regardless of race, were given the same privilege. Due to state laws and prohibitive policies, many women of color were unable to exercise their rights, even given this momentous event. In light of these facts, we asked women to look back upon this part of our history from various perspectives, inviting both a critical eye as well as one that sees how far we have come. Finding inspiration in the power of women to influence public perception and the perseverance to continue the arduous fight to obtain equal rights beyond ratification, we gather women in a collection of visions and voices to continue the conversation.
All right, and so now we're going to have a few of the artists who are here joining us this evening via Zoom speak about their work. Lisa, I'm going to have you go first. And we're also, you saw a quick shot, Lisa's pins are fabulous. So if you are in Colorado and you can come see the show, please do. Lisa, go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me? Yeah?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So hi, first, thank you, Megan Francis, for inviting me to participate in the show and to speak tonight. And thank you, Samantha and everyone at CPAC. It's just so exciting to see this show, at your space, and to see the pins physically somewhere besides just my studio. So I'm excited about that. But yes, I'm wearing part of my project now. I just want to use my time just to briefly share some of the research that inspired my project, which is called Votes for Women 1920/2020. So I created or recreated 20 button designs that were used by individual suffragettes in suffrage organizations. And so they produced buttons as well as a variety of ephemera as a means to kind of visually influence public opinion regarding women's voting rights. So I became interested in the buttons early on, but I also wanted to know, how much women are participating, in elections today, and how many women are holding office today. How far have we come? So I found a study from the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers, and I'm just going to share a couple of the statistics that I found. One is that women actually make up a slight majority of registered voters, so like just over 50% of registered voters are women. But in 2016, only 63% of eligible women voted in the presidential election. Also, in terms of representation of women that hold political office, so just 23% of congressional seats are held by women. So that's 126 women out of 535 total members. And just 47 of those women are women of color. And at the state level, only 29% of state legislators are women. And of that 29%, just over 7% are women of color. So in response to these statistics, I decided to recreate these buttons from the 19th and 20th century to hopefully encourage 21st century women to vote and to encourage all voters to support women candidates. So I hope the buttons just serve as even just a small reminder of a woman's right to voice in government and to our overall capacity to influence election outcomes. We're over 50%, y'all. Like we can we can do this. So yeah, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Jordana, I'm going to have you go next. And I can unmute you. There you go.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you guys so much for having me and having me in the show, and everything is amazing. Just everything is just, it's kind of mind blowing. But yeah, it's a good time. It's nice to have some positivity this year. But I just thought I would read sort of an extended artist statement about my work because it's a little bit different. And also, can't hold a thought in my head, so I'll just read my statement if that's okay with you guys. So in order to make images, I need to feel emotionally invested. While I'm all for women's rights, I wasn't inspired to make images specifically about the 19th Amendment. I realized it's because I've always had the right to vote and never felt the frustration of that particular inequality. This led me to think about when I have felt slighted, and it took maybe 1 millisecond to come up with being a woman photographer. That in itself, that I'm labeled a woman photographer and not just photographer, annoys me to no end. Men have controlled the whole history of art for all time. In my formal education in photography, 99.9% of the work I was introduced to was made by male photographers. When we're taught that this is the important and correct way to correct work to emulate a male point of view, where does that leave me? How can I honestly express myself as a woman when most of what I've seen or learned from is what men have made? If I'm ever able to unlearn the rules of male photography, truly express myself as a woman, would that work be rejected as wrong? As men control the world, we're left to gain license from them. They allowed us the right to vote, to be educated, to have jobs, to be included in the art world. In the pieces I made for a Yellow Rose project, my photographs are seen through a window cut into photographs I love made by master photographers. Through these pictures, I wonder if my work will always be considered less than or unimportant because it wasn't made with an 8x10 or inspired by a male poet, or new topographics or mountains sublime, or uninteresting because the nudity isn't sexual and therefore useless to the male gaze, or irrelevant because I'm over 35 and I have children. With all the inequalities and biases women endure, what good are women's rights if all the rules continue to be put in place by old white men? So just to show you how I made my work, I printed out the photos of by the masters, and then I took my utility knife and cut a square into them, and then took my work and put it behind that work and then shot. You can't really see it that well, but I shot it, and that's the resulting image. I found it emotionally hard to cut into these prints, these pictures that have been elevated to this level of sacredness made by the gods of photography. And I feel like I was, there we go, defacing them, even though my intention wasn't to be violent or disrespectful. It's more like I'm searching for myself within the work, cutting into it and looking inside. So very coincidentally, just last week, I was reading about Roque Venus painting by Velázquez. I don't know if you want to. I don't know how to share my screen, so I printed it out. If you're not familiar with the Roque Venus, there it is. The original's in color, obviously. So this is basically was considered by men to be the standard of perfect femininity. And in 1914, Mary Richardson, a Canadian suffragette, went to the National Gallery in London where it hung, took out a butcher's knife and slashed the paintings many times in protest, against the destruction of women. So although I wasn't directly inspired by the 19th Amendment, I think it's an interesting parallel between the cuts I made to the master's images and a suffragette slashing the Venus in sort of a similar like feminist slicery, if you will. Both actions take to task and interrupt these revered pictures by men in order to bring attention to the inequalities women have to endure.
Wonderful, thank you. And Claudia, I'm going to have you share next, and I can share one of your images as well.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
So, hi everyone, my name is Claudia Ruiz Gustafson. I am zooming in from a dark parking lot in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. I just plug, oops, oh, thank you. That's just showing the crop image. So first of all, thank you so much, Samantha, for this opportunity, and Frances and Meg for inviting me to be part of a Yellow Rose project. This has been a very interesting learning experience for me. So the first thing I did when you invited me to participate in this project is that I went to the library to inform myself as much as I could about this movement. I was impressed that women in this country fought over 80 years for the right to vote, for women to have the right to vote. And of course, I also went and did research about my own country, because to be honest with you, I always took for granted the right to vote. I really never thought about that. And so in Peru, thank you. So in Peru this year, we are celebrating 65 years of women's right to vote after 100 years of fighting for that right. So I learned that. So in my research, of course, I learned about women like Susan Anthony, Lucy Stone, because I am a very visual person. It was a photograph that really caught my attention. I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you can see it here. It's a woman. It's a woman on a white horse, and so her name is Inez Milholland. So I decided to read as much as I could about her, and I was really impressed by her short life. So in this picture here, this is a picture taken in 1911. She is dressed as Columbia, and she's leading a parade for the women's suffrage movement in Washington, D.C. So I learned that Inez wanted to be a lawyer, and she was rejected from both Harvard and Yale, but she still managed to go to study law in a university in New York. And she spent all her life working on behalf of the women's suffrage movement, but also she was interested in world peace, in the prison reform, inequality of the working conditions from African Americans, She was a really, force. She was a really strong woman, and my body of work is basically an homage to her memory, and to her life. In this picture here, I don't know, there were many posters done after that picture of Inez in her horse, and she was holding a banner in that parade that reads, "Forward out of error, leave behind the night, forward through the darkness, forward into light." So basically my images are responses to those stanzas, and they all have words at the bottom of the images. And also, what else I can say about that? Inez's last words were right before her death were, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" She was the year that the time that she died was after a speech, and those were her last public words. And she died actually in 1916, 4 years before the passing of the 19th Amendment. So she never could see that made a reality. So this body of work, which are only 8 images, are an homage to Inez's memory, and to all to her short life. She died when she was 30 years old. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last, Marina, I'm going to have you share about your work. And I have your image. Hang on one second, but if you want to start talking, and I'll pull your image up.
All right. Okay. Well, first I want to thank Francis and Meg for this beautiful and so relevant project. I was very honored to be included and to be part of this, and really mind blown, impressed with the work that everybody and the approach that everybody that participated. And thank you, Samantha, for having me today. When I first was invited to do this project, because I have my studio in a collective that we share with many all women artists. I have all these ideas to work about it, but then I decided to connect it with the work that I've been doing for the past 9 years, and that I've been working with a female body, and kind of sharing, I guess, one of the principles or the mottos of the suffragettes as well, that it was to give women a voice, and from a female perspective. I grew up in Argentina, and the geographical and social environment that you grew out influence a lot the kind of work you do. So I grew up in a very patriarchal household and society in general. And in Argentina, we're strongly influenced by psychoanalysis. And I was always grew up bothered especially by Freud's writings. And some of his quotes. And one quote that always resonated with me, and I was particularly bothered with, they said that he called women, and especially women's sexuality, dark continents. And it's a term that he took from colonialism, and it was used to denominate the countries that were unexplored, that we knew very little about them, mainly Africa. And then he took that term and used it to define his views on what women's were. So in my work, I photograph the female body, and I chose a model that had the proportions that you see of a body in an anatomy book, kind of like, the way psychoanalysis approach in a medical way, and also the pose that you see in those anatomy books. But also the pose has many other meanings, and it's the mountain pose in yoga, it's the pose that you see in Catholicism and the religious figures of the virgins, but more than anything, it's a pose of openness and vulnerability. So the body that I photographed became to me the continent, and the topographic surface that, through the act of embroidery, that it's historically associated with the feminine, I aim to bring to light, and literally to the topographic surface, things experienced and felt by the body from a female perspective, as an intent to blur the distinctions between the inside and the outside body. So this particular piece, the woman is holding this banner with the world equality, and I think it's that dream. I took that dream of equality that the suffragettes had, is what made them being able to be vulnerable and also to be fierce and fight for our rights and for a world that the voice women could be heard. So in that dream, that woman becomes a bird, like ready to take flight. And that's what the very big wings. And also on the head, it's almost like abstraction of the yellow rose, but also the fire within that lead them to fight and to persevere in this fight for freedom and equality.
Thank you so much. Well, I wanted to thank you to all the artists. Thank you, Jillian, for sharing. I also wanted to leave a little time while we're all here. If anyone has any questions for the artists, please feel free to put those in the chat. Do you have any questions for the artists, please? I love, as part of the project, that you put this group of people together, a group of women together, but that you were still meeting, individuals. Some of you knew, some of you didn't. I think that's also a really wonderful piece of the project. So.
Yeah, I think it's so amazing to be in this room and have, after we've experienced all these images digitally for so long, to feel the conversation and the reverberation of all of these voices in this space is so powerful, and we're so grateful to everyone who made work and put their time and effort and passion into this, because it's palpable, especially in a room all together. It feels amazing. So thank you.
And we did have a question. Marina, did you do the embroidery on your piece?
Yes, it's all manually intervened.
A great question.
I love your work, Marina.
Thank you. I love everybody's response to it. And I love so many different perspectives and views. So I think it's just a beautiful homage.
Yeah, thank you, Frances and Meg. This event would have been overshadowed by the pandemic, but you are making these conversations happen that are so important, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, wonderful. I just can't thank everyone enough. And as I said, we will have some more programming. We're doing fireside chats starting next Tuesday. And those will be at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. We're going to be going live on the CPAC Photo Instagram. So if you're not following us, please do. And you can see the list of artists. We'll start next Tuesday, and we're doing those chats the three Tuesdays before voting day. So I'm really excited to use that as well. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us this evening. Thank you so much to the artists and to Jillian for sharing. It's been really fantastic to kind of close out the opening reception with this talk. So thank you, everybody, for joining this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.